am John Kane, and I'm welcoming you to Let's Talk Native on this Saturday, May 16th, 2020. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage, and in some cases, we start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native radio. We don't do prayers. We don't do buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, our survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics and identity, and health nowadays. And we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We take on the false narratives, and we provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all live right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams live on our website, and I do encourage you to go to our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. There we've got links to our podcasts, our videos, all kinds of stuff there. We even have a store, so you can buy some Let's Talk Native merch. So again, so our audio streams live on our website. We also stream live video of the show on Facebook Live, via Facebook Live on our Facebook group pages, both my page for this show and the show that I do in New York. And then and my wife and others share the live stream across other Facebook group pages. So you can catch us on Facebook as well. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud after the show, which post it up on all of your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and to our YouTube channel. On our YouTube channel, you will find not just videos of our shows, but you'll also find the short form videos that we do that are very topic specific. We address specific issues, and usually they're only about a 10-minute video. They're good tools. So I encourage you to check those out. Our latest video, which is called This is Canada, it breaks the myth about how nice Canada is. It talks about how predominant racism is, especially towards Native people in Canada. So I encourage you to check out that video in particular. Okay. Look, I am the show's host and producer. I'm joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who is managing our audio and our video. Let's get started. All right. In the promo, I basically am saying, look, let's look at church and the spread of COVID-19. And the reason that I want to drive this message home, look, I've done a couple of shows where I've at least mentioned Navajo territory. I was actually on the morning show on WBAI this week, and Michael G. Haskins, the host, was asking me about it. You know, and the thing that had slipped my mind, and I really do apologize for this, because it's important that we think about this. The spread in Navajo territory began with a church gathering in the first week. Actually, I think it was like March 7th or something like that. They had this large church gathering where members of the various churches throughout Navajo territory came together for this gathering in the first week of March. And then they returned home. So they immediately took the virus. And that's where there were a couple of people who were hot at the time, you know, with the virus. So that's where it was spread, at this church gathering. And then, but the whole nature of proselytizing and mission work and church congregation work, this network was used to spread this disease. Not intentionally, so I'm not saying that. But, you know, our history with the role that church has played in destroying our people, killing our people, wiping out our people, creating policy that was geared towards wiping out our people, is still pretty raw. So when I consider the fact that there seems to be like all these questions of why Navajo? Well, I mean, look, right now there are, I think there are there's almost 4,000 cases, 3,900 cases in Navajo with 140 deaths. Now, we hear a lot of numbers, and I throw numbers around all the time about the number of cases in the world, the number of cases in the United States, you know, how many deaths there are. So when we break it down to one specific territory, maybe some people hear 3,900 and it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. Navajo territory has more cases than 11 of the United States. 11. There are 11 states that have fewer cases than Navajo territory. And for U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico, by the way. On a per capita basis, Navajo territory has more cases than any place else in the United States, and of course, that would actually put them on the higher end with most places in the world. But more cases on a per capita basis, more cases than any place in the United States. And so when you ask the question, and look, we talk about poverty and lack of water and everything else, but I think, and again, I apologize for not emphasizing this earlier. The role that these church and this mission work, this congregation kind of work goes in doing, look, and this is spreading a disease. I have a problem with spreading this evangelicalism in general, because I think some of the spread of Christianity is problematic because it is such a cultural shift. Now, I think it's important that people realize that at the heart of the epidemic in Navajo territory was the role that the churches played in this. Now, and it's not unique there. I mean, South Korea went through the same thing. Their big spread in South Korea was again caused by church congregations. So in two specific places, and one that was a major hit in terms of globally, South Korea, and now one of the biggest hotspots considered in the United States, Navajo territory, churches played a significant role, not only in spreading the disease, but continuing to pitch this whole idea that group worship is so necessary. And you're seeing it all over the country. And of course, you can make a direct connection between the evangelical right, Trump worshipers, the open up my state movement, and of course, Second Amendment, all this. You can tie them all together. There's a direct line. White supremacy. It's all connected together. Now, I'm not suggesting that only white people are churchgoers. I personally, as a Native person, will never understand how we have allowed church to play such a big role in Native territories, considering what the history is. And I say the same thing about black folks. I mean, when you consider the role that church and churches played in slavery and the slave trade, I don't know how you get from there to here. I mean, and I say the same thing about enlistment in the armed forces. I don't know how we go from having our women and children murdered at the hands of U.S. Military to saying, sign me up. I don't get it. But I think it's really, really important that we understand where some of this spread comes from. Now, I know I sound like I'm just a Christian hater. And look, whatever you believe, you believe. But the problem is when you promote that belief in such a systematic way, that not only do you spread the belief, but you spread things like COVID-19 along with it. When you tell people that this life doesn't matter because it's all about the afterlife, and you can cast away all kinds of other actions that people can do to improve the quality of life, and you just tell people to pray. That's why we don't do prayers on this show. Well, I wouldn't do prayers anyway, but the whole idea that we're going to tell people, oh, I'm sending you thoughts and prayers, instead of anything meaningful, and instead of doing an act of kindness, because telling somebody you're going to pray for them is not an act of kindness. It's words. It's cheap word salad. It means nothing. I mean, it may mean something to you, and maybe somebody's going to say, oh, I feel good that they're praying for me. But that's it. I mean, there could not be a shallower gesture. And I got to tell you, and I don't know this to be a fact or anything else, but I also got a question. How many people, when they say, oh, you're in my prayers, literally get on their knees and pray to their God to help somebody? I mean, when you tell people you're going to pray for them, do you actually pray for them? I don't know. I mean, do people really do that? Maybe they do. Maybe they go to the church and light candles and do that stuff. I don't know. But there are things that we need to do, and relying on divine intervention, because I got to tell you, When people say, well, Jesus will save us. Jesus and the spread of this gospel and Jesus and all that stuff is part of the reason we're in this situation. Most of the violence in the world it can be directly attributed to people's religious beliefs, and the bizarre belief that they were chosen because they chose to believe something that makes them a chosen person or a chosen people above all else. That's problematic. I mean, that is just a recipe for disaster. When you spend your life convincing yourself and your children and your neighbor and anybody else who can get to listen to you that if you believe what I believe, that you become a chosen person and that you're gonna somehow live forever and in a holy place or whatever. I mean. And then you can say that in a way that dismisses the very preciousness of the life that we have to live and what we do with our children, the quality of life. I mean, there's concepts within the church that was initiated specifically to keep people down. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. You know what that means? Take your lumps. I mean, look, Jeff Sessions stood up there and said, well, obeying government is in the Bible. Because as far as the Bible goes, and I don't know, he cites passages, and I'm not going to get up and quote Bible verses, but he said, if governments only exist because God allows them to exist. And so they are, by extension, extensions of God's will. So if you defy government, then you're a sinner. So if you stand up to anything that your government does that is wrong, so all you folks with your guns going to the Capitol and stuff like that, you're a sinner. I know you're evangelical, right? But Jeff Sessions told when he was the Attorney General, I realized that Trump talked bad about Jeff Sessions now, so you can dismiss everything he said. But there is an evangelical belief that they can be right-wing conservatives, and that the power of the government, and especially the executive, is, as Trump says, absolute. And it's absolute not because of Constitution, but because the belief that God wanted Trump to be president. And look, there are people who, you gotta make you wonder, because how does a guy who loses an election by 2 million votes become president? Well, apparently God wanted him to be. I mean, that's what you're led to believe. I don't know. I mean, look, and I'm not going to do a whole show just bashing, church and church beliefs. But I will say that as it relates to this global pandemic, church is playing a role. It played a role in the initial spreads, and it's still playing a role. I mean, one of the big outbreaks in Florida had to do with a church congregation, a big church choir thing that a bunch of people have gone to. One of the big outbreaks in Texas had to do with a church gathering. And make no mistake about it, in the first week of March, there were powers that be that knew there was a problem. The South by Southwest Arts Festival was canceled in Austin, Texas, because the city of Austin knew that there'd be a problem if a bunch of people came from different places and then gathered and then went and then dispersed again. Which is exactly what happens with these big church gatherings. People from all over a region or multiple regions show up. Some bring in the disease, but lots of people taking it with them when they leave. That's how all of the corners of Navajo territory managed to get infected. Now, once it spread to all regions of Navajo territory, just like in South Korea, then some of the other cultural aspects of life, the close families, and many people living in smaller homes and that kind of stuff. The lack of infrastructure, the idea that people have to go to a specific place to get water, so there's that forced interaction there. I mean, because 30% of the people in Navajo territory don't have running water. This is part of the problem. But wanted to spend the time talking about this show, on this show, to talk about the role that church has played and is still playing. I mean, look, there are, you can find Facebook posts all over, right? And tweets, all kinds of stuff where people are saying, all of this pandemic stuff is just foolishness. All you have to do is pray to Jesus. Jesus will save you. Well, or what? And if he doesn't, then it's one of these perfect stories, right? Because no matter what. So if you die because you went to church, then that's because Jesus called you home. So you can be oblivious to this life, but here's the problem. It isn't just you who goes to church who gets the disease. You're bringing it home and spreading it amongst other people who maybe don't have your faith. But you're going to go and you're going to infect them. So what is this, God's wrath of God stuff? You want to talk about divine intervention? The divine intervention is the belief in the divinity that actually promotes the spread of this disease. So it isn't an act of God. It's an act of God worship. So at some point, we need to put some of the stuff in the box that it belongs in. And look, everybody can believe and they can pray. They can do all that stuff they want to do. They can worship in the way they want to. You can, look, you can do crystals and candles and incense and, do whatever you want to do. But when you start imposing it on other people and then utilizing your belief system to subjugate people and to infect people, intentional or otherwise, it's a big problem. The idea that church gathering and group worship should be one of the immediate things that gets relaxed in these, in these shutdown issues. For one thing, the only reason that states are opening up has to do because of money. And when people say something like, well, we've got to balance the safety and health of people against, we got to make sure that the cure isn't worse than the disease. What all that is a euphemism for, there's a certain amount of dead that's okay. We gotta assign death and the money together. I mean, I heard Trump say, well, people need to go back to school. These colleges need to open back up. We got to get kids, because look, some kids die on the way to college just driving in car accidents. Well, wait a second. So are you suggesting that we can look at a certain number of deaths that might occur anyway, and that's the acceptable amount of people who can die because of COVID-19? That's acceptable? I mean, there's still a dead body count being, even if it isn't, it's not being itemized and it's not being detailed. This is the rationale that's going on in people's heads. And now throw into that the mix that that if you believe, your Christian belief says, well, that person's gone to Jesus or hell. I mean, it's like, so it's just God's will. I mean, this is the logic that is being used here, folks. We need to take care of ourselves. And this brings me to another topic, and I've talked about it before. We don't have immunity to new diseases. This is a disease that came from animals. So unless you were a bat, you did not, you couldn't have had immunity. Nobody is immune to COVID-19. I know what you're saying, and we'll talk about the herd immunity thing in a minute. But nobody's immune to it. Why? Because it's not a human, it is not a disease that was born in, that humans have been exposed to. It's brand new to human beings. Now, if you have a strong immune system, your immune system may be able to react to a virus entering into your body. If you don't have underlying diseases, if you don't have underlying conditions, if you don't smoke, and if you're in better shape, you have a better chance. Now, I say a better chance. It doesn't mean that makes you immune. There is no immunity. So I want to be clear. There's nothing you can do that can make you immune to this disease or the next one that comes along like it. But what you can do is try to be in better health. And if you can't quit smoking, quit drinking, if you can't change your diet, if you can't change your activity and do that kind of stuff, and many of us can't, or won't. We should at very least do what we can to give the strongest impact to the next generation. Look, I've talked about drugs before. And look, there are people who are drug dealers, there are addicts, and those are people that are a major part of the drug trade. But there's also those young kids, and even adults, who are not drug addicts, who are they don't have a substance abuse problem, but they may become that. They may be going in that direction. Maybe they're on the precipice because of other pressures at home and whatever it is that people are seeking when the first time they get high. Well, I say the same thing about healthier lifestyles. We need to do all that we can to encourage our kids to eat better. We need to do all that we can to improve our health. We've got to improve it. I mean, which means we've got to spend a little bit more time in feeding our children, regardless of what habits we have adopted as families or as parents or as older generation. Maybe people can't write us off as the lost cause, but we shouldn't be writing off our children. So we should do everything we can to break that cycle. Let's stop pretending that fry bread is good for you. It isn't. Let's stop, get some of the pop out of your refrigerator. Look, I know ramen noodles taste good, but if you think because your child will only eat ramen noodles and hot dogs or Kraft dinner, that's the only thing you can feed them? No, you've got to try some other stuff. I'm not saying they can never eat ramen noodles or never have a hot dog or never have, Kraft dinner. But let's not let these unhealthy things be the staple. I mean, we've got to do more. And look, we've talked about things like, food is our medicine and having gardens and that kind of stuff, fresh produce. Even if you can't do any of that, you can still change the diet in your households. We need to do something dramatic. And if this disease tells us one thing, it's that if you have underlying conditions, if you have asthma, if you have, COPD, if you've got liver and kidney problems because of, again, whether it's, tied to drinking and substance abuse or whatever else, whether you have diabetes, a lot of these things are diet related. That puts you at a higher risk. And I actually saw some people post things on Facebook and on Twitter saying, my loved one was positive. They did have COVID-19, but they died of something else, and they still listed COVID-19 as the reason for death. Well, there's a reason for that, because you know what? You can live with heart disease. You can live with diabetes. You can live with you can go to dialysis and live with bad kidneys. You can do all that stuff, and you can live years that way. I'm not saying that's a great quality of life, but you can live that way. You can smoke for years, and some people will smoke and never die of quote unquote lung disease. But if you have these things, and if you do these things, COVID-19 exacerbates those underlying conditions. So yeah, maybe you do die of a heart attack. But the reason you died of a heart attack was because you had COVID-19. You wouldn't have died of that heart attack otherwise. So I get. So what I'm trying to say, and look, I don't buy everything that the television says or the radio says. I have some problems with things that come from the Democrats, from the Republicans, from this scientist, that scientist. I mean, I don't buy any of it hook, line, and sinker. But some of the stuff is obvious to me, and I do know enough people who have been involved either in the treatment of the disease or have had it. I know a few people that had it and didn't do so well with it either, that I think I can formulate an opinion even absent all the noise from talking heads on TV and radio. But I'm not going to dismiss everything that I hear. One of the things that gets talked about, and I said I'd bring it up, this notion of herd immunity. Here's the problem with this concept. If you don't know what herd immunity means, it means let everybody get exposed to the disease, because once they get it, they're immune and the disease can just die out because there's nobody to get it again. For one thing, that's not true, because even if everybody on the planet today had COVID, got infected, and those who survived, went on, to live productive lives. We have babies that are being born. So there's another generation that'll come up that won't have the immunity. They won't be born with the immunity. So this can come back. But here's the other problem. There's no evidence to suggest that once you've had COVID-19, that you can't get it again. In fact, there's pretty strong evidence to the contrary. There have been episodes, there's been incidents in China and in South Korea. And now, Jake, you were telling me on this Navy ship, this Navy vessel that the disease ran through, those who had it and cycled through, some of them are now, I'm not even saying relapsing, they're catching it again. Look, there's no such thing as herd immunity to the common cold. There's no vaccine for the common cold. And you know what? The common cold is a coronavirus, by the way. And you can get a cold 3 times a year, 4 times a year. You can get a cold, have a period of time that you are, without it, and then, get a cold again. You may be immune for a very short, you may have cold antibodies in your system after you have the cold. And they may stay in your system, but they either are not strong enough to fight off the next bout, or they dissipate, and then those antibodies disappear. There's no evidence that once you've had COVID-19, that you can't have it again. So that throws the whole herd immunity thing out the window. I mean, and that assumes that you're willing to sacrifice the percentage of population that you would lose in the effort to get everybody immune. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here, if herd immunity doesn't work, you know what else doesn't work? Vaccines. So all of this rhetoric being, I heard Trump saying, he's going to fast track a vaccine to have it out by December. No, he's not. In fact, by December, we may be able to fully confirm that you cannot become immune to COVID-19. There's already pretty good indication that you can. There's also a pretty good indication that there are varieties of this disease that can stay in your body and be dormant for a period of time. I mean, this new thing that kids we started seeing in children, which was described as Kawasaki syndrome-like. This may be, coming from this notion that the disease can lie dormant for a while and then manifest in something other than just a respiratory infection. I don't know what the final answer is here, but we are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. Look, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break when we come back. I'm going to give you a few of the numbers. I mean, they're pretty. It's still pretty scary, and I think people need to know what they are. But so we'll talk about that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be back in a minute. Hi, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Let me start by thanking my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John of the RJE, Rothschild Enterprises. I want to thank the folks at Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply. I want to thank the Eric White and ERW Enterprises. And all of you who share the show and make contributions from time to time. But, look, we do need those sponsors that support the show on a weekly or monthly basis that help us, continue to do what we do here. So I very much appreciate those guys, and I appreciate the rest of you as well. I also want to thank all of you who share the show and spread it out, spread the podcast, the videos, both on Facebook and on YouTube. That's how we get the message out. All right, some of the numbers. The United States has 1.5 million cases, and the number keeps going up. And it's not just the number of cases that they have had. So out of 1.5 million cases, the active cases is over 1 million. And it adds right now the active cases is 1,078,000, almost 80,000 cases. And it increases every day. So the number of people who are recovering or dying is not taking away from the number of new cases each day. So each day, the number of active cases in the United States goes up by about 8,000 to 10,000 people. So you can't say in any way, shape, or form that the tide has been turned. If you're still growing out the active, if you're not having more recoveries than you are, or I mean, if you have more cases every single day, active cases, if that's growing, if you haven't started to turn that number down, then you haven't turned the corner. I mean, it's just that simple. And so again, 1.5 million cases in the United States, over 1 million of them are still active cases, and the number of active cases is going up by 8,000 to 10,000 people every single day. Every day. All right, the number of deaths, 90,000, and this is not June. This is May, 90,000. Now, when I said earlier that I am. I don't buy a lot of the BS that we're fed by government officials, by the right or the left. All those people who are singing the praises of guys like Tony Fauci or this Dr. Birx or anybody, I am still troubled by the fact that initially this task force had estimated that there would be between 100 and 200,000 deaths total. And then they said, well, we mean there will be between 100 and 200,000 deaths by August. And then for some strange reason, these two prominent figures that are much praised, some of the few people praised even by the left in the Trump administration, said we're going to reduce that number to 60,000. We think the total number of deaths in the United States is going to be 60,000. And it's unexplainable. There's no way. Nobody ever says, and here's the reason why. We're basing it on what? There's been no turn in the corner. Look, the United States still, to this day, has tested less than 4% of the population. So it's not like they have this, broad read on not only who are sick today, but who's been sick. So they reduced it to 60,000. And then we passed 60,000 weeks ago. And then, of course, they said, well, we're going to change that 60,000 to 70,000. Of course, we passed that. Then they said, well, 75,000. Now I just heard somebody say, well, we think that there's going to be 100,000 deaths by June. What do you mean by June? In a week, they're going to reach 100,000 deaths. In the United States. They're at 90,000 now. They're adding somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 a day. And that's come down a little bit. If you believe all the numbers, that's come down a little bit. Today was a $1,200 day, or $1,200. I always say dollars. A 1,200 death a day. It'd be better if it was dollars we were losing instead of lives. 1,200 people died today in the United States. According to, according to the stats that are put up. So they're going to be at 100,000 in about another week. It'll take about a week. It won't even be into June yet. So I'm troubled by any of these forecasts. And every time we hear somebody say, well, we forecasted this and then it didn't turn out that way. They said, oh, we thought we were going to have a run on hospitals. But then you spend 6 weeks telling people you're going to have a run on hospitals. And what does that do? It discourages people from going to hospitals. And again, I made this point before. Proof that by scaring everybody away from going to the hospitals, that it worked, is when they turned the Jacob Javits Center in New York City, in Manhattan, into a hospital, and they brought the USS Comfort, this hospital ship, into port. Nobody showed up. Where were they? Where were the broken arms? Where was it? Where the the cuts and the injuries and the heart attacks and all of these other things that people go to the hospital for? My wife went to the hospital a couple of days ago on Thursday for a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot. Now COVID-19 causes blood clots, but she didn't have COVID-19. She was tested twice. But you know what does contribute to blood clots? When you shut everything down and people don't come up with any reason to be active, you just, we joke about binge watching television. That's one of the things that contributes to it. And there's other lifestyle choices, and I talked about it earlier. Look, we need to stop smoking and drinking and all these things that destroy our health. But think about this. So, I mean, if my wife didn't go to the hospital, a condition that is very treatable with just blood thinners, could have gotten worse and could have caused a heart attack. So there would have been a death. And look, I'm not predicting my wife's death, but there could have been a fatality based on not going to the hospital. And that isn't a COVID-19 death, but it is contributed to by those who've been scared for 6 weeks and told for now 2 months, I should say, told for 2 months that the hospitals are disasters, that they are they're a war zone. I mean, we've been hearing it. So when Andrew Cuomo gets on television and said, "Well, we overestimated the number of beds that we're going to use," you didn't overestimate the number of beds you needed. You scared people out of those beds. You scared people from going to those beds. That's why you've had a 4-fold increase in the number of deaths at home. Some of those people who died at home might have gone to the hospital if you hadn't scared them for 8 weeks. So, look, I am very much troubled. The numbers that I see, and I use this worldometers.info site. I know they're not all the numbers. They are not telling us all the people who are sick. They're not telling us all the people who have died. They're just telling us all the people who've been tested positive and who either died because with a positive test or died by an overwhelming number of symptoms that suggest that it was COVID-19. And these antibody tests that they're doing, why it'd be great to believe that they're accurate and that it'll give us better numbers to extrapolate how many people have really been infected. I don't know that they're going to get out there enough. And then the contact tracing stuff. Look, countries like South Korea who've been able to do it effectively, or China, other countries that have been able to not only get an adequate number of tests, and again, for all of the boasting about how many tests, and the United States has done almost 12 million tests. Almost 12 million tests. But you know what? For the percentage of their population, 42 other countries have tested higher percentages of their population than the United States. So you can save all the envy of the world stuff. And then this test that they're using now, this Abbott test that the White House is using, and frankly, even the Seneca Nation has it now. By some estimates, is only about 50% accurate. Clinically tested, it came through and it said, well, we've got an 85% accuracy. But in practice, they're finding out that 50% of the negatives, the negative results, are false negatives. So you have to get it done multiple times. But look, if you only have a 50-50 chance of getting an accurate negative number, that's like flipping a freaking coin. Now, I will say, if it tests you positive, you are positive. The problem is if it tests you negative, you might still be positive. So, I mean, and again, everything's fast tracking. Like, as I said earlier, this notion that there's, this big international contest to come up with a vaccine. There isn't a vaccine for HIV/AIDS. There isn't a vaccine for there's no vaccine for the common cold, folks. So the idea that they're going to come up with a vaccine for this in December, like Trump is boasting, or even next year or 2 years, and even the flu vaccines, they took years and years to develop, and a flu vaccine is only about 40% accurate. Only 40% of the people who get vaccinated for the flu each year avoid the flu. And of course, most people don't get flu vaccines. So the vaccines for viruses are very, very problematic. They're hard to, and because we don't know if there is such a thing as immunity, antibodies that stay in your system that can fight. So there's herd immunity. If herd immunity doesn't work, then vaccinated immunization won't work either. So when I hear somebody on television say this is going to be around, this may never go away, I believe that. And not because they said it. I believe that anyway. I mean, and so just because I hear a talking head say something doesn't mean that I have to say, oh, I can't believe that because they said it. No, I'm making some of these deductions myself based on all the information that's around. And I'll admit, I'm probably more obsessed with this. And part of it is, and I'll admit, I am fascinated by what's playing out here. I mean, I think this is among the most incredible times to be witnessing what humankind is going through. I mean, we're seeing the failure of capitalism. We're seeing the failure of so-called democracy. I mean, you got a president who got elected with 2 million less votes than than his opponent. You've got, polarization. You've got such factionalism within the political system and in the streets. I mean, it's an amazing time to look at the political breakdown, the economic breakdown, the social breakdown, and then this pandemic, and of course the economic breakdown. I mean, it's an incredible time, and I don't want to be sound like I'm happy about it. I am not celebrating the death to America. I'm not crying about it either, but I'm not celebrating it. And the reason that I find it most disturbing is that human lives are on the line here. And when I hear some morons saying, well, the cure can't be worse than the disease, that's a euphemism for saying we got to let enough people die so the rest of us can benefit. Nobody will put a number on it. But, Jake and I joked, I guess. We talked about this last week. How ironic was it that they talked about these death panels during the Obama administration associated with Obamacare? And now you literally have white men sitting around a table deciding what is going to be an acceptable loss of human lives to jumpstart the economy. Because that's the decision that gets made. So all of these things, we're going to find out if we've got a weekly trend that says we have a number of lesser hospitalizations, new cases and deaths. Look, all of that stuff is still not turning the corner. This is number fudging, so you can justify having somebody else feed you. So you can justify having somebody else manicure you, do your hair. so you can justify sitting in your church. That's what these calculations, these metrics that they're saying that they're going to put out there. And of course, some states aren't even doing that. They're just opening up. Oh, yeah, the bars are open. These numbers, like I said, keep in mind, as I said today there are 10,000 more active cases today than yesterday. 10,000. It's gonna be interesting to see over the next several weeks whether that number of active cases starts to get higher and higher. So it's not 10,000. It was bigger than that before. So it's kind of come down to 10,000. But now that things are opening back up, for humanity, no, for economy, it's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out. Talking about opening up, I got to tell you something. I got something wrong the other day, and I want to be real clear when I make a mistake. I made a mistake. The governor has chopped up the state into I think nine regions. And there's an expression that we out here in this area, this region, the southern tier. Look, we hear things like upstate and North Country and all these, and of course they are specific regions. I mean, you see signs on the thruway, leather stocking, whatever the hell that means. But so there's all these regions. Southern tier. Now we assume that Salamanca, and because the Interstate 86 is called the Southern Tier Expressway, that's considered Southern Tier. So when I heard that the governor was going to give the go-ahead for the Southern Tier to open up, I mistakenly included Allegheny Territory or the area around Allegheny Territory. I don't consider us part of New York State, Allegheny or Cattaraugus, but so I assumed that when he said Southern Tier, he was talking about the area around Allegheny, Salamanca and such. And I was wrong. Cattaraugus County, which includes the city of Salamanca and Olean, and Chautauqua County, which, again, Cattaraugus Territory borders Cattaraugus, Erie, and Chautauqua County. All three of those counties, including Allegheny County and Niagara County, are not, they're considered Western New York. So, I talked a little bit about gaming as it related to this. Ironically, the areas that the governor is authorizing to open up sooner are the areas that don't include any Seneca territory. Well, I take that back. It does include Tonawanda Seneca territory. But it's interesting because the Finger Lakes area region that includes where Del Lago Casino is, where Batavia Racino Casino is, where Finger Lakes Casino is. So some of the major gaming sites for New York State are that take gaming away from the Seneca territory. They're farther along in terms of being opened up by the state. So again, I guess the point that I wanted to make is I was wrong in assuming that the southern tier, that the state is trying to authorize to open back up at some level, included part of Seneca territory. It doesn't. Salamanca is not for these purposes considered part of the southern tier. So I do need to be I need to stand corrected on that issue. Look, look, I'm as indifferent as anybody on this idea of opening up. I understand, as living here on Seneca territory, I understand how important it is that the Seneca Nation be able to get some return to their means of public finance, which is predominantly gaming, Class 2 and Class 3 gaming. But I'm not any more of a fan of the Seneca Nation opening up its broad economy than I am anybody else, especially because of the spread issue of this disease. Now, I'm going to assume that if and when the Seneca Nation opens up its gaming, it's going to have partitions, it's going to have some very, very strict protocols on trying to keep things, disinfected, and they're going to be relatively extreme, which means a couple of things. It means, for one thing, all of these protocols, including social distancing, is going to reduce the revenue that these facilities generate. You know, if you have a restaurant and it opens up and you've got to reduce your capacity down to 50%, that means the potential for you to make money has been cut in half. So that's just, you know, that's just what the regulations are going to be. Now, I'm not saying the Seneca Nation is bound by state regulations or even the federal regulations necessarily. And of course, there are no federal regulations as it relates to shutting down because Trump wants everything open. But even if the Seneca Nation is not bound by state regulations, there's a certain, you know, PR, you know, and the image, you know, that has to go along with this thing. So they can't just create a dangerous environment. And I guarantee the Seneca Nation will be much more diligent about how it handles its safety protocols than probably the state licensed facilities will. I feel pretty confident with that. But what I will say is they're going to be less profitable. I'm not even discussing the revenue sharing battle, but that means that the Seneca Nation not only took this hit for almost 3 months, or what will be almost 3 months, that when they open back up, they're still not going to be very profitable. Now, I don't even know how the state licensed casinos are going to be profitable. They weren't profitable. They were barely profitable anyway. You know, Finger Lakes, they've been trying to unload that to the Seneca Nation. Batavia, Racetrack, they've been trying to unload that to the Seneca Nation. Del Lago, they've been trying to sell that to the Seneca Nation. I don't know how those things can even stay in business. I know the Seneca Nation could stay in business, but what I'm saying is that it's going to be significantly less revenue coming from them. And I don't know how Oneida or Akwesasne or you know, St. Regis or anybody else is gonna do. The Seneca Nation is a much bigger gaming player than Oneida and St. Regis, but they also have a much bigger, you know, annual budget. And so it's going to be interesting to see how well the Seneca Nation can revive its means of public finance, and again, how are they going to walk that line? I mean, how are they going to walk the line when public safety and life and death are on the line? It's going to be tough, and you know, I know the Seneca Nation is not going to be. They're not going to want to have anybody attribute an infection or a death to one of their facilities. But if they open up, the likelihood is that you know whether somebody catches it there or not, but whether there can be, you know, some implication that there was, you know, that'll probably come. I mean, look, we've had a number of deaths here in Seneca territory here without gaming, and again, as social gathering. Look, I came up the road here in Seneca territory, and I saw 3 or 4 people setting up to have parties right there. I mean, party tents and the whole bit. So I know everybody's going to get laxed, and it's going to be interesting to see how the numbers play out. But I know it's going to be, I know there's a lot of concern where native territories are going to, how they're going to survive financially. And it's just going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I do expect that the Seneca Nation will probably open up their Class 2 facilities before the Class 3 facilities because they're a little lower overhead. I think they're going to try to, they'll probably try to do what they can to begin to have some revenue stream. And but it's gonna be a challenge. It's gonna be a challenge, and I know I was hearing some news from out in Oneida. From what I understood, the rumor that I heard was that Oneida that they were going to stop the annuities, June annuities, or annuities after June won't happen out there if they can't open up. And I don't know if that meant by June 15th. I don't know, but if they couldn't open up, they were going to end it. And there's a lot of people there's a lot of people here that depend on the money that comes from the Seneca Nation. Certainly out in Oneida, that's the case as well. So, you know, it's a challenging time, but when people start to put more emphasis on dollars than lives, that's where it starts to get pretty dicey, I guess. And it's going to be. And that's the calculation that's being made. And no matter what anybody says about balance, or balancing the effects, or, is the cure worse than the disease? Make no mistake about it. All of those are euphemisms for an acceptable body count in the interest of trying to stimulate the economy. That's what all that's about. And, if it's not your body or your family member that loses their life because of trying to open the economy back up, then I guess you can look the other way. You can continue to, strap on your AR-15 and demand your freedom. But when your freedom comes at the cost of other people's lives, including your so-called religious freedom, which is where I started this program, that becomes a concern. All right. Well, I want to thank you for listening. We will be, back here on Tuesday, and of course, don't forget we do our WBAI show on Thursdays as well, and of course we stream them. We stream it all right here live on Facebook. So we'll be back here Tuesday and then on Thursday. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Thanks for listening. Y'all.